Genesis 37, 1-2. Jacob lived in Canaan. When Joseph was 17 years old, Joseph would bring evil or a carnal report to Jacob. You know, he was favored by his dad, and, the coat of many colors and all that. And why was he favored? Why was Joseph favored over the other brothers? The other brothers tended to be carnal all the time. He knew because Joseph wanted to study Torah that eventually Joseph his dream and all those things that happened to him would come true because he would love Torah and he would be a great man of God. So Jacob kind of believed the dream that his brothers would bow down to him. The stars and the moon would bow down to him and all that. And yes, he was carnal at this point in life because he was 17 years old, and I think just a little bit cocky. You remember when you were 17? Did you remember, were there any people in your senior class a little cocky, went about bragging all the time and all the stuff, and he was favored by his dad? So was he doing that around his brothers? I think no wonder they kind of didn't like him, because he was a little cocky guy, cocky kid. Anyway, but what happened to him? He was thrown in a pit, the king's prison. And sometimes when we, followers of Christ, do things we shouldn't do, because bad things can happen to the good and the bad. It rains on the just and the unjust. If we're not honoring the Lord like we should, we could be thrown into the king's prison just like Joseph. But what happened? Because in this Torah portion, Joseph says, Yahweh did it for my good. But from that 17 years old of age till when he was 30 and became a leader of God's people in Egypt, what happened during those years? That's 13 years? He gained wisdom. His spirit was humbled. But because he was sensitive to what he had been learned as a kid, a child, to Torah, because Jacob taught him Torah and he loved it, eventually this wisdom blossomed and he was able to save all Israel, okay? Because 70 people eventually, came to Egypt, but then a multitude left Egypt for Canaan. And so sometimes Yahweh, what's he do to us? He puts us in a pit if we're being carnal instead of spiritual, okay? So hopefully you'll read some of the details here and see that there's a lot more to that statement than what I've already shared. Joseph had a dream. This is Genesis 37, 5-10, where his brothers bowed down to him. His brothers said to him, to this 17-year-old kid, will you tell us what to do, or will you govern us? And they're older, and they know everything, And he's telling them that they will bow down to him. They didn't like that at all. But Jacob believed the dream would come true. And so Jacob sends Joseph to take some stuff to his brothers. Verse 15-17 says, a man, and the sages said that was an angel, Gabriel, said to Joseph, your brothers are in Dothan. It says they were being carnal in Dothan. So this is a good story. You can be in a place in your life where you're being carnal, or you can be spirit-led. Is your mouth closed, being spiritual, or is your mouth open, being carnal? So can Dothan be a place of blessing or curse? Yes, it can be. Here in Genesis, Joseph was being carnal. He was thrown in a pit. Bad things happening to good people. But in 2 Kings 6, 13-23, Elisha was living in Dothan. He was spirit-filled, spiritual, okay? And his servant came to him and says, hey, the Syrian army is all around us, about to destroy us. And Elisha said, pray to God, Yahweh, open his eyes, because we are greater than that Syrian army. You are greater. And he opened his eyes, and he saw this huge army of angels, all carrying swords. Okay? And so don't we want Yahweh to open our eyes sometimes? Because if in the next 6 years some things are getting kind of tough, so we need our eyes open to be spiritual and not carnal. The parallels in Romans 8:13 and 14. If you are carnal, you shall die. If you put to death carnal desires, that's anything that opposes the word of Yahweh, you shall live and be called sons of God. I have to do this too. I can be carnal, but I don't want to be carnal. I want to be spiritual. This is a lifelong process, okay? And sometimes we're going to have tests and trials. Sometimes we're going to be thrown in that prison to get us to be spiritual, okay? That's what happened to me. Be like King David, Psalm 119. Open my eyes so I can behold the wonders of the law. Did you hear that? Open my eyes so I can see the wonders of the law. That's Torah. Genesis 37:18. When Joseph's brothers saw him at a distance, they were talking about, okay, how can we kill him? You know, so can you put yourself there? They're all talking about Joseph and how cocky he is, and they want to kill him. Well, Reuben overheard the plot, and he says, let's don't kill him. Judah, says, we can't make, he was kind of greedy. He said, we can't make any money if we kill him, so let's sell him. They sit down to eat. A caravan of traders comes near. Judah says, let's don't kill him, let's sell him. Some Midianites pulled Joseph out of the pit, sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. Reuben returned, found it empty, the pit empty, and he says, how can I deal with my father's pain? Because he knew how much it was going to hurt Jacob. Jacob believed that Joseph was dead. It says Jacob mourned many days. How many days did he mourn? 22 years times 365 days. He mourned a long time. Long time. And they say, and he even says in the scriptures here, that while he was mourning, he could not hear the Holy Spirit anymore. He quenched the Spirit because he was depressed and mourning, because he kind of felt responsible for Joseph's death. Jacob refused to be helped and lived in depression. Joseph was sold later he was put in the prison, king's prison. He was sold to Potiphar. And then that ends chapter 37. And then chapter 38 is about Judah. This is interesting. It interrupts the story about Joseph, which goes to the end of Genesis. But here's this story about Judah. How important is it? See, this story about Judah, it's extremely important, and you should understand it and know it. It says, Genesis 38:1, Judah is demoted from his status with his brothers because the brothers blamed him for what happened to Joseph. Then what does Judah do? He's kind of going downhill here. He marries a Canaanite woman. Well, that was a no-no. You're not to marry a Canaanite woman. They have 3 sons. It's very important. Onan, and Shelah. But verse 7 to 10 says, their sons, and Onan, were killed by whom? Yahweh. It says they were killed by Yahweh. He says, and people say, well, my God's the God of love. He won't kill me if I disobey him. Well, you could be taken before your appointed time, because he doesn't send out lightning bolts just all the time. But in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira, who killed them? Who killed them? Does God change? He does not change. We Christians cannot edit out Genesis 38, 7 to 10, where and Onan were killed by Yahweh. We cannot edit that out. Why? Micah 6:8 says, O man, Yahweh requires you to do what is good, to make righteous decisions or judgments, and to be merciful with others. What does that mean? To be humble. Extend mercy and grace to other people who may not be as strong as you or as knowledgeable as you are. Extend that mercy. Why? Because at one time you didn't know God. I didn't know God. He extended grace to us, right? Everyone in here. He extended grace to us. And it's the parable of the unmerciful servant. If you walk in unforgiveness because someone did something to you, you got to lay it at the altar and go talk to your brother and work it out. And if you don't, it says you're thrown in the king's prison, okay? Why did God kill and Onan? Sheila's still alive. The youngest boy is still alive. Why did God kill and Onan? They were wicked. Okay, they were wicked. They despised God. Could God bring... Because Yeshua came from the line of Judah. Don't you see it? Yeshua, if they had lived, Yeshua would not have, maybe not even been born, because the bloodline would have been through or Onan. But Sheila is still alive. And according to Hebrew society, he was to marry. So this story here about Tamar, who was descendant of Shem, she, because her husband had died. You get the picture? He had died, and she knows, she understands biblical stuff a little better than Judah does. So she placed the harlot, puts on a veil, and goes out because she knew Judah would be passing by. And you can read all the details there. But later she becomes pregnant. And it even says, what will you give me for doing this with you? He said, my signet ring, my cloak, and my robe, and my staff. That's who he is. And it says she bore in Judah's likeness great men of God. But see, in Genesis 38:11, Judah told Tamar, stay in the house, marry Shelah, his third son, when he grows up. What did Judah do? He lied to Tamar. Why? He thought Tamar killed and Onan. No, God did it. And Judah's Canaanite wife dies, and then he goes out and sees a prostitute. He thinks a temple prostitute, and there's more detail there and about that, so you can read that. And then she disappears. And then 3 months later, she starts showing. And so they bring Tamar to Judah to be burned. Why? The daughter of a priest, Shem, it says if she commits harlotry, she is to be burned. Could there be a parallel here in Revelation? When God's people who have committed harlotry against him because they're not doing his Torah are burned. It says those times will be difficult. Who can stand? It says also, Rashi says that Tamar was the daughter of Shem, so she had to be burned for her sin. The daughter of a priest is held to a higher standard, just like leaders were held to a higher standard. We Christians are to be a royal priesthood. Actually, Tamar was more righteous than Judah. Genesis 38:25. Tamar shows the people. She didn't tell the people, well, Judah did this. She didn't do that. That's disrespectful. What she did, she just shows people the ring, the cloak, and the staff. And she said, pregnant from the man who owns these things. She did not accuse Judah. So now he can fulfill the marriage duty because he's not going to let Sheila do it. So he can fulfill it. And she's pregnant. He's obligated to do it, actually, because she's pregnant. He has to marry her. And then verse 26, Judah admits that he had treated Tamar wrong in front of all the people. Why? Because she exposed him in a way in front of all the people. Why did Judah admit it? He got caught. Or he would have not admitted it. It says, at the time of giving birth, there were twins in her womb. One child tries to be born first. Does that sound familiar? The midwife, he sticks out his hand. The midwife ties a red thread around his wrist. And then he was to be born first, but he pulls it back in. And then another baby pops out. That's Perez, and that's where Yeshua comes from. But there's a red thread on Zerah's wrist. He's born second. So there are verses. It gives me chill bumps to even talk about it. There are verses. It says the scepter will depart from Perez's descendants and be taken to England, where Zerah's descendants lived. And I'm just touching the tip of an iceberg here. We could teach for weeks just on this one topic. There are books written on it. Because in England, actually, Jeremiah went. Also, Joseph of Arimathea went there. And they had this, and some say even Mary, after the death of Yeshua, went there to be with family. Their descendants lived there in Scotland, in Ireland, in England. So now back to the story of Joseph. And I'm telling you, there's what I just said, there's archaeological proof. There's proof in the coat of arms that this happened. There's proof in many, many other things, constitutions of nations in Europe. Now back to the story of Joseph. Potiphar was blessed because of Joseph, and he let Joseph take care of all that he had. Potiphar's wife lusted after Joseph, and she begged him, because he was a good-looking fella. Rashi says that the sons of Noah were commanded to not commit immorality. So when Potiphar's wife grabbed Joseph and then accused Joseph, and he said, I cannot do this wicked thing, okay? Because he was taught from a child, you do not do that. He was thrown in the king's prison. And then there's the story of the cupbearer and the baker. I talked more about this last year, but I won't go into it this time. So if you want to hear more about that, go to last year's teaching on VaYeshev. But in Genesis 45:5, because he was in the prison, but then he gets out of prison, Genesis 45:5 says, be not grieved, talking to his brothers, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me, for God did send me before you to preserve life. That's scripture. God put me in the pit. Bad things happening to good people. So when you're going through a test, when you're going through a trial, and it's going to happen every single week at some point. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. It's just a test. He's wanting to sanctify you. He's wanting to sanctify me. He's wanting to take us. He's wanting us to be spiritual instead of carnal. It's just natural to be carnal, okay? And it's the definition of the true Israelite. I've been talking about it for 2 weeks. Who's going to enter that kingdom age? They believe, and it's been taught, that everything that happens, these are Hebrew people. See, they look at life a little different than we do. We look at life sometimes just like events that happen. Well, this happened, like Job. This happened to me. God did this to me. But then you get over it and you move on. But they say, no, a true Israelite believes that everything that happens to us is from God. He's the big man. He's in charge. The good, the bad, and the ugly. For we are rewarded according to our works. That's our walk. So sometimes he's going to take you through things to get you to change because you don't want to change. The Haftarah, Amos. Oh, this is so good. I'll just go through it kind of quick. Amos 2, 4 and 6. It says, for 3 transgressions of Judah, or Israel, and for the fourth, I, Yahweh, will not turn away the punishment of Judah, Israel, because Judah has despised the Torah, and Israel sold the righteous for silver. So what are they talking about here? Talking about the 10 northern tribes, sold the righteous for silver, set up altars, did pagan things. They were destroyed in 721. What about, and then I say 1918, World War I, and then 1945. This is the northern kingdom, the descendants of the northern kingdom. So they were punished in 721, 1918, 1945, and I also say beginning 2020, 4 times. Because you got to find 3 other times that the 10 northern tribes scattered all over the world. So how are you going to punish them 4 times unless you include these other dates here? Lord taught me this last year. Well, what about Judah, the southern kingdom? I'm going to punish you 4 times. Okay, we know what Nebuchadnezzar did in 586. We know what happened with the Romans in 70 A.D., but when else were Judah punished? How about 1945, the Holocaust? They were just saying, leave me alone, let me worship my God, live in peace, the same way that we live here today. But I'm also saying, what about beginning in 2020? Is Judah going to be punished? Are they keeping God's Torah? It says the reason is they abandoned Torah. Has Christianity abandoned some of the Torah? Has Judah abandoned some of the Torah? There's got to be a 4th time. Amos 3. So in the last days, Yahweh says, this is a prophecy, you only have I chosen from all the people of the earth to teach my Torah. You disobeyed, so I will visit all your sin against you. That 4th time. Yahweh is speaking about judgment beginning in the house of God. That's 1 Peter 4:17. So Amos 3:3 Yahweh says that Israel is loved by him and that Yahweh will bring judgment on their sin, because how can 2 walk together unless they agree? Because God never changed his Sabbath. Yeshua never changed his Sabbath. He said, follow me, walk as I have walked. Does a lion roar when he has no prey? Does Yahweh fail to judge sin after he has said he would judge sin? Who will not prophesy and speak about the judgment of sin that Yahweh spoke to these prophets? And listen, it's not my prophecy. It's not our prophecy. We're just telling you what the prophets have said. And when we speak what the prophets have said, that becomes prophecy. It's nothing new. Zechariah 2:8, you are the apple of Yahweh's eye. Okay, do y'all see this apple? You are the apple of Yahweh's eye. There are many scriptures here that tell you what that means. This is a Hebrew idiom. It's very, very important. King David loves Torah and says to Yahweh, keep me as the apple of your eye. Deuteronomy 32, Yahweh led Jacob his every step as the apple of his eye. That's Torah. Proverbs 7:2 doesn't get any plainer than this. Keep Yahweh's Torah as the apple of your eye. Verse 11, many Gentiles, Christianity, it says Gentiles, I'm saying Christianity, shall join themselves to Yahweh and be my people. That's you. That's the people doing Torah in Tennessee, in the United States, all around the world, and be the apple of his eye and love the Torah. Because in Zechariah 3:9-10, this is part of today's Torah portion, in one day, 1 hour, it's going to be a special day. It's a day of judgment and blessing. We are plucked out of that fire that burns those who are not doing Yahweh's Torah. It's Revelation 18. I will remove the sin of my people in the land. They will follow Yeshua Jesus and do Torah. This occurs when I roar. That's Hosea 11:10. Sages say that a true Israelite does not complain. A true Israelite does not listen to gossip. Extend mercy. That's read Jude 1:20-25. Is it important sometimes to suffer for doing the right thing? I believe it is. Read 1 Peter 2:19-20. And then Zechariah 4, the angel of Yahweh asked Zechariah, what does he see? Zechariah sees a 7-branch menorah and 2 olive trees. I believe this is where the Hanukkah actually originates. If there, and I know it's popular to believe that there wasn't enough oil for 8 days, 8 nights. I know that. If it's true that there was only 1 vial of oil and that it miraculously burned for 8 nights, Josephus, the historian, would have talked about it because he goes into great detail about everything that happens at Hanukkah and everything else that happened to the Jewish people in the past. Also, the Maccabees would have talked about it. So personally, I don't think that happened because it comes out of the Talmud. Okay? Show me the verse. Show me the biblical verse. You can't. And I believe it's because they got a great victory. They were outnumbered like Gideon. They got a great victory. And that's what we want here in the future. And then I got stuff that comes from the Maccabees. I'll just close with this. It's Mattathias. This is 1 Maccabees 2. And his son spoke to the king's officers. The kings were desecrating the temple and doing all these things. Says, we cannot be the king's friends. Okay, here are the Maccabees saying, oh no, we cannot be the king's friends. So if some things happen here in the next 6 years, and they're saying, you got to do this, you got to do that, are we going to be their friends and go along? We cannot be the king's friends because my family will not abandon covenant. This is all about covenant and all about, it says, covenant of our fathers. That's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We will not abandon the law or the ordinances. That's Torah of our God. He then skewered, that's my word, a fellow Jew who tried to desecrate the altar in Modin. Kind of like Phinehas skewered somebody. Mattathias said, let everyone who is zealous for the law and covenant follow me. And I think that's what's coming upon the earth. See, they're going to say, you got to do this, you got to do that. No, we're going to follow our God. We're going to do Torah. We're going to be zealous for covenant. 2 Maccabees 6. There's a 90-year-old man. He's a Maccabean. His name is Eleazar. He's 90 years old. They forced his mouth open and put pork in it. Now, you've been taught Torah all your life. This is detestable. God says it's an abomination. He spits it out. Who put it in his mouth? His friends. Maybe even some of his family. He spits it out. He says, if you don't eat this pork, we're going to kill you. His friends said that. He said, I ain't going to eat this pork. They said, okay, we'll do you a favor. You got any friends who want to do you a favor sometimes? We'll do you a favor. Now, if it's a Torah friend, I'm with it, okay? But you got to be careful about some people sometimes, you know. They said, we'll do you a favor. We'll go get some kosher food. We'll go get a lamb. We'll go get some cattle. We'll cook it up real good. And you could eat it, and when we put it in your mouth, pretend it's pork. He says, I cannot do this abomination because it would lead the young people astray. I've taught Torah all my life. So what did they do? They tortured him until he died. Be the apple of Yahweh's eye. Be zealous for Torah, the laws, and the ordinances. And that includes the seventh-day Sabbath.